Hey everybody, in this video I just wanted to give my impressions and overall thoughts about how Sunshine was handled in the 3D All-Stars. So this is my first recorded video, so I want to get a couple things out of the way. First of all, I won't be using a script because this is mostly just meant to be my thoughts and I'll be pretty much just improvising what I'm saying. So there might be some some mix-ups here and there of my words, and I apologize for that. Second of all, the microphone quality won't be the greatest because I'm using an integrated microphone. This might change in the future, but for now, it's what we're going to deal with. So, I want to start with when the rumors came out, when the initial leak started. I think a lot of us thought it was too good to be true. They wouldn't remaster every 3D Mario game, but obviously that ended up happening. And in the very early stages, I think I speak for a lot of people when I was hoping that the three games that were going to be included would be some sort of remake or remaster where they made everything in higher resolution, redid the textures and all that, added bonus content. And when the trailer finally was revealed, it turns out these are just going to be straight ports. Now, I wasn't too upset with that because just playing Sunshine on the Nintendo Switch is a novelty in itself, and it was worth my purchase. So I went ahead and got the game. Initial impressions, I thought they handled the flood controls pretty well. Mapping them to ZR and R was probably the best solution, and it worked out pretty well. The 30 FPS, I'm not really one to care about the specs of the game, so as long as it's smooth, I don't really care that bad, and even though Mario 64 got the boost to 60, it doesn't really disappoint me that much that Sunshine's in 30 FPS. We're going to start with the goods, and there's a lot of goods to this port, specifically to Sunshine. The widescreen is incredible. I think they did a good job with that, and the resolution, or sorry, the increased resolution for the textures looks amazing. Especially, you can tell with the coins and the HUD. I think they look the best in the Switch port, way better than in the GameCube. So those two aspects of the game are great. I think they did a good job, and now we're going to move on into the things that are just a little questionable. So, obviously, the flood controls needed to be changed to work for Joy-Cons and the Pro Controller. And I think people already knew this was going to happen, so the logical way to do that was the ZR and the R, and that actually turned out pretty well. But it kind of baffles me how this game doesn't have GameCube controller support, because it's a very easy feature to add. You know, they could have very easily made it support GameCube controllers, but they chose not to. And that to me comes off as a little bit sloppy, I guess. Second of all, the button mapping is a bit strange. So, on GameCube, the Y button goes into the camera, the B button dives, A is jump, and X switches your nozzle. So, they ended up changing this. So, Y is now dive, and in B's place, you can now jump. So there are two buttons for jumping, much like the later Mario installments after Sunshine. And that's a fine addition, but for some reason, they decided to... They decided that that would be a good idea for this game. So, if Y is dive, then where's the Y cam button? Well, they decided to put that in C stick in, the right stick in. Now, for most casual players, this probably isn't that big of a deal because you can just adapt to that. But there's a lot of technical moves in speedrunning Sunshine that involve using the Y cam, which are now miles more inconvenient to perform. So this change is kind of strange to me because they could have just mapped the buttons in a one-to-one correspondence, but somebody at Nintendo must have thought that for user-friendliness, this made more sense. Not sure why, but that's the change they made. Now, I wouldn't be complaining about this, or even mentioning it, if they added a way to revert these controls or map buttons. But for some reason they didn't add this, which is, again, kind of baffling and comes off as a little bit sloppy. But now I'm going to move on to a different thing that they changed about the controls, which is the camera. So, original Sunshine camera is inverted on the x-axis, which is commonplace for 3D platforms. Basically, in the 90s and early 2000s, so it makes sense for the time. And it makes sense now that they would change it back. But again, it's commonplace nowadays in 3D platforms to have some sort of way to 3D platformers to have some sort of way to change this back. You can edit, you can change the sensitivity and the X and Y axis in most modern 3D platformers, so it's a little confusing why they would leave this feature out, especially if they're going to change it from the original version. And in addition, the standing flood is also inverted from the original. Before, holding down R until it clicked and spraying, if you held up, it would spray down, and if you held down, it would spray up. Now it's the opposite, and again, this is probably for user friendliness, but the people who played the original have a different muscle memory, so it would just be nice to have the feature to change that back. And the third feature they changed was the Y-cam aiming mode, so that is also no longer inverted. So again, I just don't understand why they would have these features but not have a way to revert them back to the original or customize them. It just seems like a modern type of... It seems like a modern thing to do, and it just comes off as sloppy. And that leads me to the thirdness. The overall sloppiness of Sunshine, compared to the other two, is kind of baffling to me. So, Sunshine, more than 64 from what I've played of it so far, seems to have random frame dips here and there. Now, they're not unplayable by any means. They're just in places that weren't in the original GameCube release. So, for example, when I hover near the Shine Gate, the game drops frame rates. When I open the map, the game drops frame rates, which it did not do in the GameCube version. And there's a few areas where the game just drops frames randomly. And the game runs in 30 FPS already, so it's pretty slow when it happens, but infrequent enough. But at the same time, it's more frequent than the original release, which is kind of bizarre considering this is on 18-year-older hardware. So I don't understand how they couldn't just figure that out in testing and optimize it. So it comes off as a bit rushed. And to add on to this rushedness, it's come out that in the secret stages, they left the debug cubes in, which is a problem with emulation. Nintendo just seems to have done a very sloppy job with this port. And to me, it doesn't have that Nintendo polish that you'd expect, especially from an anniversary title. Now, with all that out of the way, this game isn't by any means unplayable with these issues. It just feels cheap, if that makes sense. And, you know, as I played through this game, my muscles were slowly adapting to the inverted controls and the switching between moving flood and whatnot. And I got used to it, and the frame rate drops were infrequent, and they didn't mess with the platforming, but it just came off as cheap. And I guess I just wanted to express this in a video. And you know, I think from now on, if I ever get really into speedrunning this game, I'm going to be using the GameCube version, just because the movement would feel a bit more smooth with a single R button to control flood, and the Y-cam will be closer to the jump and dive buttons, and the game won't have these frame dips, and overall, I just feel like it's a more polished version. Now, the Switch version is fun for the novelty, and it's great to be able to play Sunshine on the go, but it's just not going to be my go-to version. So yeah, thank you for listening. That's been my video. See you guys.